in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight we're going to be talking about the mental health care system from a patient's point of view. My guest is Janet Gotkin. Janet was a mental patient for 10 years. She was hospitalized for a total of more than 3 years. She has had over 100 electroshock treatments and over 1 million milligrams of tranquilizers. Janet is the co-author with her husband Paul of Too Much Anger, Too Many Tears, a personal triumph over psychiatry. Welcome to the show, Janet.
It's good to be here.
How did you begin your involvement with the mental health care system? Was it in college?
It was in college that I had my first real contact at all, and that was with a psychologist in the counseling office. I was having a really hard time, the way I think a lot of people do at that late adolescence, first year in college kind of thing.
You were homesick or something?
Well, it wasn't exactly homesick, but I had come from a bad year preceding college, and I just found myself unable to work, unable to concentrate, scared, depressed, crying, a lot of very discomforting, upsetting things, and I went and was assigned to a psychologist in the counseling office and found him no help at all, which is an understatement. He was an extremely cold, unfeeling person who in fact felt that I was using him to get out of doing my work. It was a cold first contact. It proceeded from there to the college letting me stay the second semester in spite of the fact that I was obviously feeling really rocky, as long as I would see a psychiatrist, to the college saying that I had to take what was called a medical leave of absence for a year, and with the condition that I would be in treatment, psychiatric treatment for a year, they might let me come back to school.
So you ran into the attitudes toward mental health early, didn't you?
Certainly. And there was an element of coercion from the very beginning. It was basically, you're not shaping up and you're not being who we want you to be. Therefore, go to professionals, get, quote, help, and maybe we'll let you come back. I found in all of my contacts with psychiatrists that compassion and help and sensitivity were not their greatest qualities. When I went back to New York, which is where I live, and I was in psychoanalysis for a year, almost a year, with a very eminent psychoanalyst, a former president of the American Association of Psychoanalysis, and I found that my problems were getting worse, my feelings were more unmanageable, and I tried to commit suicide. That act really brought me fully into the clutches of the mental hygiene system.
Now define what you mean by being fully in the clutches of the mental health care
Well,
system.
within a week and a half after I had made the suicide attempt, I found myself a patient in a mental hospital. I was a voluntary patient, so-called. It was not a state hospital, it was a private hospital. It was not a snake pit as we're accustomed to thinking of it, and yet there was no element of my volunteering to go there. And the question was, are you going to go willingly or are you going to be forced to go? The reaction of my parents, of the psychiatrist, of the administration of the hospital was, yes, obviously this is where she belongs. And I found in the following years, I spent 10 months in this hospital, and I spent the next 9 years in and out of mental hospitals and undergoing a variety of what are called treatments, euphemistically called treatments. I found that there is very little element of voluntariness in people's involvement with psychiatrists and psychiatry.
Let's talk about suicide for a minute. Our attitudes, we're really confused about suicide. I think we don't really know what to think. We feel we have to stop a person from committing suicide, and we feel we have to help a person. But you don't believe we really help, that we only stop people from doing it?
Well, we stop them for a certain period of time. I mean, we can forcibly intervene in someone's life and lock them up and perhaps stop them in that way, although people do commit suicide in mental hospitals. But it became clear to me that the phrase helping someone is a phrase bounded based on a certain arrogance and a certain idea that somehow psychiatrists or the people who are running mental hospitals or mental health centers are in a better position to decide what's in someone's best interest than that person themselves. The assumption is if you try to kill yourself or if you want to kill yourself, you therefore don't know what you want. I mean, it's an assumption that no one in their right mind, so to speak, would want to kill themselves. Or this is not a right that we can allow people to have. And the system comes down very heavily on people who try to kill themselves. There isn't a state commitment law in this country that doesn't include as one of its major portions the statement that a person who is dangerous to himself or herself or others shall be, involuntarily confined. So it's a very, very much central to the theory of mental health practice in this country. However, what we do to people who are either despairing enough to want to kill themselves, to want to take their lives, who are desperate enough, who are unhappy enough in their own situations or whatever, is take them and subject them to humiliation, to degradation, to physical and psychological abuse in the course of our, quote, helping them, that is almost incomprehensible. I mean, it's so appalling what happens to people, the way they are stripped of possessions, of dignity, of freedom in mental hospitals, that to call it help would be, indulging in fantasy of the worst sort. It's very self-serving to call it help, and the people who tend to call it help are the people who are dispensing these services. The mental health professionals tend to call it help. The people who are on the receiving end of it are not the ones who call it help.
If you could suddenly change things, I mean, how would you want us to see it and how would you want us to handle it?
Well, I think primarily it is the coercive nature of the system that explains or that underpins all else that goes on. If the mental hygiene system were a voluntary system, truly voluntary, then a lot of things would have to change. The assumptions that one can act in another person's best interest against her will would have to change.
Do you mean right down to, I will take this drug?
Or I will not take this drug.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if it were possible to walk into a mental hospital or a counseling center or a RAP center or whatever and feel that it was just as possible to walk out again, that you would not be forced or coerced into accepting drugs or other treatments, the feelings would be very different. Now, it's not possible. I mean, people speak of voluntary hospitals in this country. When you sign yourself, not that I know of. In New York State, I can speak most clearly about New York State. In New York State, the only thing that approaches voluntary is one's legal status, one of the three legal statuses under which you can enter a hospital, which is called, I think it's called informal. Basically, it means you don't have to sign a paper. You can go in and out. But very few people are admitted under that.
All right.
In other words, if you're a voluntary patient in a New York State private hospital, for example, you sign a form saying, I am signing myself in for 15 days or 30 days or whatever. And if before that time you wish to leave, you have to go through very complex legal maneuvers. You have to notify the hospital in writing, et cetera, et cetera. The hospital has a choice whether to let you go or take you to court to have you legally committed. I can't tell you the numbers of people I know who have signed themselves in so-called voluntarily to hospitals and months and even years later have not been able to get out.
Oh, well, I'm going to present an argument to you that I'm sure you've heard many, many times before, and that is, what about all the so-called dangerous people? I mean, we as a society say we can't let them walk around the streets and we can't let them do harm to other people. And if we had a completely voluntary system, you know, that would happen.
Well, there's such an extraordinary amount of violence occurring on the streets and in society. It would seem, just taking it from that point of view, that neither the mental hospitals nor the prisons are doing very much to eliminate violence. That's certainly one thing. What you bring up is the arch stereotypical notion of the mad mental patient careening down the street, mallet in hand, you know, ready to commit murder or worse. The statistics seem to bear out the idea that there's less violence, so-called, among mental patients than in the population at large outside. Mental patients commit fewer violent crimes. Ex-mental patients commit fewer violent crimes. The other thing to be concerned about is inherent in what you're saying. We have to have mental hospitals in order to lock up dangerous people so they won't go around killing other people, is the idea that we can predict whether or when someone is going to commit an act of violence.
Well, the whole system is filled with terms. I mean, we hear of suicidal tendencies.
Homicidal tendencies.
Right, so you're saying
aggressive, prone individuals. It's very jargonistic, and it leads one to believe that, well, psychiatrists are called as expert witnesses in trials. You know, do you think this person will or will not? I hate to quote studies or whatever, but this one I think bears being quoted. Bruce Ennis, who is a lawyer with the New York Civil Liberties Union and the Mental Health Law Project, and a man named Thomas Litwack, who is a psychologist, collaborated on a study for the California Law Review. They reviewed all of the published literature dealing with predictions of dangerousness or predictions of behavior in mental patients, felons, convicted felons, criminals, etc., etc. They came up with what to many people was shocking. It wasn't startling to me, or with the conclusion that psychiatrists are, their accuracy in predicting behavior is about what it would be if you flipped a coin.
your own doctor didn't seem very terrific at predicting when you were about to try to commit suicide. I mean, he didn't really help you much there, did he?
No, he didn't. Partially because I think his conception of a suicidal act was that it was a symptom. I use that in quotes, you know, a symptom of my mental illness. It wasn't a human response to pain or to despair or hopelessness. It was a symptom to be viewed that way, to be treated with drugs or electroshock, or if none of that worked, to be treated by incarcerating me. It was never, he never reacted to me as one human being to another human being. Let me help you with your pain. Let me, you know, try to respond to you on a human level. I think that the viewing of people's behavior and people's pain as mental illness is another of the main pillars that upholds the mental health system. We tend to look at people who are suffering and whose suffering takes bizarre forms as if they themselves were some subspecies, some exotic form of life, rather than just people who were suffering extraordinarily. And we treat them punitively, moralistically, violently. We strip them of their constitutional rights. It's rather an appalling system. It certainly is in no way responsive or humane, although the language that surrounds it is very much, we want to help you, etc. I think we've all heard it, you know. Mental patients in the past several years have begun to organize politically around these issues of forced treatment and forced incarceration. They've begun to examine the language just as women began to examine the language that was so much a part of their lives. They began to look at phrases like maternal instinct and woman's place, and all of these things that we had never really questioned very much, and begun to see that they were used in the interest of other people. Well, we've begun to look at phrases like schizophrenia, mental illness, treatment, etc., etc., and see them also as being politically charged because they support the power, the extraordinary power of a very small group of people over a very large group of people.
It seems to me that there's, I know you don't feel as hopeless about it, but it seems to me that a person who is about to have shock treatments does not have as much of a chance of having husband, wife, or some relative be an advocate for him or her as a person who's having a gallbladder operation, because at least you can go to a medical dictionary and you can read about gallbladders and you can find out about alternate treatments and so on. But that's much more difficult. That information is much more difficult to get when you're dealing with mental health.
It is more difficult to get. It's also more difficult. It's more difficult to get the facts. They certainly are. They are available, but they're available in professional journals and so on.
Let's use you as an example. When you were having shock treatments, and let's talk in terms of involuntary treatment, you had enormous quantities of drugs administered to you and many, many shock treatments. I mean, what was happening? Was anyone saying you shouldn't be taking these drugs at this point? Were you thinking these aren't doing me any good? I mean, what was happening?
Well, it's a very complex issue that we're getting into. It's the issue of abrogating responsibility. It's the issue of having faith in a doctor. If you know what I'm saying, psychiatrists and other medical doctors tend to say, if you don't believe in me, I can't treat you, which means abrogate your intelligence, your instincts, and just let me do what I want. Well, it's easier to do that in psychiatry in a sense because it's very scary when people are going through really bad times, and you tend to kind of feel, well, gee, maybe they do know what they're talking about. They're doctors, they wouldn't really do something that would hurt me. But the fact is that that's not true necessarily. In my own case, I felt often that I was not being helped, certainly. When I dared to even question, perhaps, maybe this wasn't the thing or the right thing, I was faced with the power in the therapy situation, which was I was totally dependent emotionally and for drugs on a therapist for over 9 years.
And it was the same one,
would not,
right?
Yes.
Same therapist.
He would not brook any kind of, questioning. It was really a power thing, in the sense that he knew, and I didn't know. I didn't know because I was a woman. I didn't know because I was a mental patient. How part of the mystique about mental patients is that we don't know what's in our best interest by virtue of being mental patients. It's a really nasty catch-22, because if we did know what was in our best interest, then of course we would say, bring on your Thorazine, and, we know you only want to help us. The interesting thing is that I come from a family quite well educated, quite politically sophisticated, and yet no one, myself included, thought to question the facts that were told to us. We never thought to look up the side effects of the drugs. We never thought to question, well, maybe, okay, he says shock treatments don't cause brain damage. Why should I believe him? Maybe he's wrong.
You did have a rather horrible experience with drugs, didn't you, with one of the drugs?
I had a number of really...
I was thinking of the one that you told about in the book when you were at home one evening and you just suddenly keeled over.
Yes, I was on an extraordinarily high dosage of Thorazine, which is a very commonly used so-called tranquilizer, and I went into convulsions. And when my husband Paul called, my doctor reluctantly came. He called the police also, not knowing what to do. The doctor came over and he said, well, I'm not really surprised that it happened. And Paul said, oh? And he said, well, I guess I'll have to lower her dosage. Now, I was on 2,000 milligrams of Thorazine a day, which is incredibly, it's way, way above the maximum recommended dosage.
Do you remember what the maximum recommended dosage is?
Oh, I don't know, but people take 200, 400 milligrams a day.
And you were on 2,000.
And I weighed 85 pounds, and I took this, not necessarily, I took this in conjunction with other drugs. I took steadily over years Thorazine and other similar drugs. I was told they're not habit forming. I was told they don't cause any kind of damage, all of which are not true. It turns out the literature is available. Over a long period of time, drugs like Thorazine and Mellaril and Haldol cause, high dosages administered over long periods of time, cause irreversible permanent brain damage, a disease called tardive dyskinesia. If you ever happen to be unfortunate enough to walk around the back wards of a mental hospital or nursing homes, you will see people who have tardive dyskinesia. We could have become informed, and that, to get back to what you were saying, it isn't a question of total power, it's a question of abrogating responsibility in a way. We never really questioned. We said maybe, well, it's not working, this isn't working, okay, try another drug, right? Try another dose of electricity, as if somehow I were suffering from some kind of exotic fungus, and if they only found the right combination, they would exorcise it.
How aware were you that they didn't always know what they were doing? I mean, you agreed to some of the shock treatments,
I
right?
agreed to them, and in fact, after a while, I asked for them, which is perhaps more shocking than anything. I was aware that they weren't helping. I wasn't aware the extent to which a lot of the things I was experiencing were side effects of the drugs. It took me, I had to be off of them to realize that my hands shaking and my inability to concentrate or read were, things caused by the drugs.
Ultimately, you took an overdose of a drug, and I've forgotten the name of the drug.
It's called Mellaril.
Mellaril.
It's in the same chemical family.
And you were in a
Thorazine.
coma for 5 days. And the wildest thing happened when you
Yes.
came out of that coma.
Well, it was a way of detoxifying, in a sense, after 9 years. I don't really know what happened in that. Those 5 days are not accessible to me. I don't remember what happened. I lived, which was surprising. It was chancy. And when I came out of the coma, I was not on drugs for the first time in 9 years. And it was like being born again. I mean, the world was just so vibrant, and I found I could read and I could concentrate, and something clicked in my brain that said, hey, maybe it's all been wrong. Maybe it hasn't been good for me. And I made a decision, although I don't know what really prompted it, to get away from the psychiatrist I had been involved with. And Paul and I sold our furniture and our car, and we took our cat and we went to Europe, where we stayed for almost 10 months. I guess it was a decision, if I had to characterize it, to take control of my life back from the doctors, come what may. It was a decision, in a sense. I was infused with a sense that I wanted to live my life. And I also had an instinct that if I didn't get away, the next time I had a problem, the next time I couldn't cope, I was going to be right back involved with drugs and doctors. And in the process...
So it wasn't really a miraculous cure?
No,
then.
I don't think it was a
It's something
cure
that
at
happened
all.
in your head, really.
I found I was faced with all of the same problems I had had. In fact, I had never come near touching them in those 10 years because they had been looked at as symptoms. I mean, they weren't problems, they weren't angers, they weren't frustrations, they were symptoms. And I found that in the year or two following my breaking with psychiatry and with drugs and so on, that I had to go through a very difficult process of finding out who I was and how to cope with the world and how to cope with myself.
But what are you saying to other people, though? I mean, you're not saying don't get involved with the system, or are you saying that?
Well, it's sort of hard to say that because there are very few other alternatives. I would say it all, to be very careful if you do get involved. There are a number of things you can find out about a doctor before you do become involved. You should, I think, people get involved with psychiatrists with less care than they buy a used car. You should ask, what is his or her feeling about involuntary confinement, about drugs, etc., etc. And they should be very wary of people giving them labels and calling them names and invalidating them as human beings.
You and your husband are working on a booklet that will be helpful to other people, and it's patients' rights.
We're working with a number of other mental patients groups in New York City, 2 other groups, Project Release and with the New York Civil Liberties Union. And we're hoping to get it distributed in the New York State mental hospitals. We're basically hoping to organize patients also to realize that they shouldn't be attributing what's happening to them to their own pathology or their own problems, but that the way psychiatry functions in this country is it functions within a political and social context. It's a system that comes down heavily on people who don't conform and keeps them divided rather than allowing them to find interest or find a basis for communication with each other.
Janet, thank you very much for being here.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for watching, and good night.
Woman was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content, and was funded by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.